I'd like to call to order this Committee of the Whole meeting of the Town of Saugeen Shores and extend a welcome to everyone in the chambers this evening. The first order of business is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so, and you can do so now or when it arises on the agenda. We have one. Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a pecuniary interest with item 5.21. I am an owner of Highbury Farm Incorporated.
Thank you. So noted. Well, they're noted. Then the next item on the agenda is additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda. And we have nothing under that. The next item then is delegations, and this evening we have Carl Sider. Sider, is that correct? Thank you. He's Source Water Protection. He's going to talk to us about the event-based area fuel threats policy. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to come tonight and speak to you. I'm here this evening with Teresa McClellan from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So if there are questions, obviously, from the ministry's perspective, she's here to support that. I'm representing the Drinking Water Source Protection Program and the implementation of that program for the region as a whole. And the region is the Saugeen, Grey Sauble, Northern Bruce Peninsula. So we cover a fair ground, and today's discussion is about the events-based areas related to fuel threats to Great Lakes intakes. This one. I knew it was around here. Great, thanks. So just a program update for the Source Protection Program. The Source Protection Plan was approved by the Minister back in October of 2015, and it has an effective date of July the 1st of 2016. So that's the date that the policies in the plan will come into effect, and we'll start to work, obviously, more closely with affected landowners to ensure implementation. It was noted when we submitted our plan back to the ministry that we had removed some of the policies due to the need for more consultation with municipalities. And it was anticipated that those updates to those events-based area policies would be resubmitted at the end of March or early April. So that's an important step that the ministry acknowledged, that there was need for more consultation, and I'll explain what we did to get progress on that work. The minister's letter also identified the need to try to align these new policies with the approved plan effective date of July the 1st. So there is anticipation to have, if these are approved, that they will be in line with the other policies that come into effect. And perhaps one of the more important pieces is the ministry also supported the need for funding to those affected municipalities that had additional policies directed towards them. And perhaps I can ask Teresa to just briefly explain how that process works.
About 2 years ago, based on the original plan submissions for all the plans around the province announced the SPIMIF funding, which is Source Protection Municipal Implementation Fund. The goal is to help smaller municipalities implement the plans, clearly. So we had very good uptake of that, but anything that wasn't, any municipalities that didn't have responsibilities under the first plan submitted didn't get any money. So we heard very clearly from all of the municipalities that were part of this EBA consultation work that we need to be on the same playing field as the rest of the municipalities, and we deserve it as much as anybody else. And I think you all wrote letters. I feel like your council did too. And the minister listened and found some money. So there were 11 municipalities identified around the province that are in the same position you are, and all of them were offered SPIMIF money in the last 2 weeks, as was your municipality. And I understand that you've written back and said we're very interested in that, and so that will be coming, which is a really big piece of progress. I was really happy to hear it because it was an unfair playing field, and you deserved it as much as every other municipality in the province. So I'm very happy to be able to announce that got done, And much thanks to your letter writing and the other municipalities in the area, and the committee sent in letters saying the same. And so that's done and on the way. So that's intended to help you implement the plans once submitted and approved. So that money will be freed up, once that plan is submitted and approved, then that money would come out. That's how that would work. Happy to answer any questions after.
I find it's always important to hear directly from the ministry when it comes to funding. Just to walk through the process of how we got to this point, we established a technical advisory working committee that was made up of municipal representatives of the 8 affected municipalities. And for Saugeen Shores, we were very well represented with Stuart Doyle to add a layer of understanding of your system and potential pathways to the lake. So all that information was included into the modeling work to get a better understanding of if there was a fuel spill, how could it get to the lake and potentially affect your drinking water source. We had 3 meetings that started back in July to work through this update to the policies and to the affected areas. The one big impact, I would say, for Saugeen Shores was the fact that you had 2 systems. One was your main, and one was a backup system for your drinking water intake. And it was acknowledged that the backup system was no longer operational, and we were able to then get approval from the ministry to remove that as a potential threat pathway. So that once that was taken out of the modeling, it did have a significant impact on the volumes that have a potential to create a concern if there was a spill. The revised policies, I would say, were much more flexible and much more reasonable when it comes to protection of from a fuel threat or fuel spill. The majority of these areas would be managed through a risk management plan, which is fairly standard within the industry, best practice when it comes to fuel handling and storage facilities. It was identified that there would be 2 smaller areas around Kincardine and Meaford that required still a small prohibition area, given that their intakes are very shallow and close to the shore. But that wasn't the case for Saugeen Shores. The entire area that I'll show you on the map is going to be managed through risk management plans. So the map, not extremely clear in this version, but we do have more higher resolution maps that we can make available. Just to give you a high-level understanding of what we're looking at here, these are the 2 areas that were identified during modeling as areas that, if there was a spill above a certain amount, could create a threat or concern. The first area, sort of I'll say the lighter green, is any fuel storage above 13,000 liters. And the other lighter blue area is any fuel threats above 22,500 liters. And what that means is any storage of those quantities of fuel above those volumes would require a risk management plan in those areas. So they differentiated between 2 zones that help to manage the policy and understand what it would mean to property owners in the affected areas. The policy wording itself, then that applies to Saugeen Shores, talks to the need for a risk management plan for fuel near the Great Lakes intakes, we are looking at existing and future threats. So anything that currently is in operation as of the effective date of July the 1st, or any future development that requires fuel storage above those volumes would require a risk management plan. The policy just speaks to the fact that we have 3 years to inventory these facilities and 5 years for these facilities to negotiate a risk management plan with the risk management official. And I use that word negotiate quite clearly because it is a process that is worked out in consultation with the affected landowners. The last point there, which is also important, is this isn't saying that they're locked into that arrangement on an ongoing basis. Any expansion or replacement to existing fuel storage is permitted. And again, that's through a demonstrated process with the risk management official that the replacement or expansion provides greater integrity. So the policies created that flexibility to allow for future growth. In terms of the requirements within a risk management plan, the identified requirements are fairly high level and broad, but they talk about the need for information on product handling and storage, the need to keep records and documentation and any inspection reports. And those typically, the inspection reports come from the Technical Standards Safety Authority, so that is a typical inspection body. Disposal methods, if they apply, if there's a need to remove fuels and dispose of them. Spill response plan is really an industry standard, I would say, at this time in age. All levels of government now are requiring that fuel storage facilities have these response plans to deal with the spill. And the last thing is containment measures, identifying what measures are currently in place and perhaps what measures could be added to ensure that a spill could be contained. This next policy is fairly wordy, but really what it's saying and what it's trying to get at is the fact that if any future applications come forward in the affected areas, we are really only concerned about fuel handling and storage within the events-based areas. We're not worried about every other kind of building permit or application. It really is targeting just that fuel threat, and that's the only threat that are identified for Great Lakes intakes at this time. The last policy speaks to the need for the installation of road signs within these vulnerable areas. And this policy does exist within the plan, but it was slightly amended to address the events-based areas. Explaining that road signs would benefit any first responders or other planning purposes on the ground to identify where the affected perimeter would be of the events-based area. So that not only the public, but staff and first responders would have an understanding when they were within the zone. So essentially what we're looking for, and we've come tonight to ask for a council resolution endorsing the proposed amendments to the Source Protection Plan, and understanding that we are currently within our public consultation period, which we've actually extended it to March 7th. And if there are any comments or adjustments that come out as a result of the consultation period, we would bring those back to council for your confirmation. The last thing I'll mention is that we actually have an open house meeting tomorrow at the Plex from 4 till 7 p.m.
Thank you, Carl. Questions or comments? Councillor Grease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Carl, I just have a couple of quick questions. We have several gas stations that are no longer operational in Southampton, the town of Southampton. And I don't know if we have any in Port Elgin, but so my question is, what happens to those fuel tanks? Is it under law, are they required to be drained as soon as they're not operational? So they'd just be sitting there, empty fuel tanks in those cases?
Yeah. Essentially, the Technical Standard Safety Authority oversees fuel storage in tanks, and part of their requirements is any closure of a fuel station would require the draining of those tanks.
Okay. So
And cleaning and before they were. Now, that's not to say that there could be some old tanks that are not necessarily regulated on old properties prior to this, their enforcement. There are sometimes older contaminated sites, but that's not necessarily.
That's not something that would be under your?
It's not under.
I'm thinking of one that's it seems very old.
Okay.
And I don't know what. So in that case, who takes responsibility for determining the extent of contamination?
I can turn to my ministry
Okay.
colleague.
I have a few thoughts on that. It really comes down to whether the contamination is going off-site. Unfortunately, if it's going off-site, we can address it.
Okay.
If it's not, it's harder to address. But it doesn't mean it can't be. Something you could do through source protection is in a future round, add that as a condition. So a condition under the Clean Water Act is an existing site, like a brownfield site that is contaminated, that has potential to cause a problem for your drinking water supply. So if it was close enough and there was, we could scientifically link that it had a potential to affect your drinking water supply, then the committee would have the option, with your support, to create policy to address that and compel a landowner to do something.
The one I'm thinking of is pretty close to the river.
Yeah, so that would be something I'd say, if you have concerns like that anywhere in your municipalities that you think could potentially affect your drinking water systems, flag them to the local Source Protection Authority to look into it in future rounds of planning. Not many areas addressed conditions throughout the province yet. Wellington or Kitchener-Waterloo definitely did, because they have well fields that are contaminated with some pretty nasty stuff. So they've addressed that sort of thing, but other areas haven't delved into that yet. But if you have concerns, bring them forward, and certainly that can be put on the list for technical work to look into and get some conclusions.
Thank you. My other question is about the statement that says that it's possible that either replacement of an existing fuel storage is permitted if it can be demonstrated that the expansion will provide greater integrity. So I wondered if you could give us a specific example of how an expansion could provide greater integrity.
Yeah. So a lot of older tanks are typically single line and don't have necessarily as sophisticated monitoring equipment that go with those tanks. So any new tanks, to meet new requirements, have to be double walled, have more sophisticated monitoring and surveillance. So it really is coming up to code with new improvements.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question, unfortunately, I won't be able to attend the open house, is related to moving tanks. So transport trucks with pup trailers on them. What kind of quantity are we talking about that can be in one of those double truck units? That would be part A of my question.
But I'm glad you bring that one up, because it's actually a concern that our Source Protection Committee has been raising as well as a future threat. And it is their interest to identify transportation of fuels as a concern. Do you know the quantity? Yeah.
I don't have it on me, but we do, because the Essex region, who also has several Great Lakes intakes, went through the same exercise. And they did add what's called a locally added threat of transportation. The threats that are under the Clean Water Act deal with handling and storage. So anything outside of the 21 in the Act, you can request to the director, say, hey, we have this local concern. What's the hazard rating? So yes, I can get that to you and certainly share it back through council, the volume in trucks. And it could be added in a future round.
So Part B, Mr. Mayor, thank you. The concern I would have is that with the road conditions in particular, these transport trucks are learning that there's a way to get close to the lake and drive the shore road to avoid driving closed highways.
Right.
And so they're actually on top of the lake, literally on top of the lake. And if they were to get into an accident that would collapse the tanker, I know they're structurally built quite well, but we've had some serious accidents. It would all just go straight into the lake. It wouldn't even have a chance to be absorbed into the ground so much.
This happened in North Bay 9 months ago, the exact situation.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Carl, how's it going?
Good.
Thank you for coming in and doing this presentation. I have a couple of concerns. My first concern is with your last slide, the comment about seeking a council endorsement immediately. It's premature to seek council endorsement since you haven't got the endorsement of the Source Protection Authority yet. The Act clearly requires that you get the endorsement under Section 34. It either has to be initiated by the Source Protection Authority or by the Minister. Neither of those things has happened yet. So this council shouldn't be considering amendments to the Source Protection Plan until we've had a resolution from the Source Protection Authority. Wouldn't you agree?
I wouldn't actually present it that way. I understand you've raised that question at our management committee, and we sought the ministry's support and clarification on the legislation, and that's actually partly why I brought the ministry with me today. They looked at the legislative requirements for undergoing amendments under Section 34 of the Act, and it was clear that the Source Protection Authority is bigger than just one board. It is the three regions, our management committee, and the Source Protection Committee. So it is a broader interpretation of what a Source Protection Authority is, and we're following that direction from the ministry.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, it's pretty concerning to me because it feels like the ministry is marginalizing or minimizing elected representation in the process. The Source Protection Authority has been a Source Protection Authority for all these years up until now. A few months ago we had this events-based business pop up. It was the first time, it had been in the works within the Source Protection Committee for a long time, but this council only found out about it, a few months ago when the plan was just about to be approved. And now we're going to hear about this again, and the ministry somehow redefines what a Source Protection Authority is, where all along the Source Protection Authority was the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, was the Saugeen Valley Source Protection Authority. Now suddenly the Saugeen Valley Source Protection Authority is whoever the ministry wants it to be, which is problematic because we've seen now 2 times where it seems like the elected representation, the people who are responsible for ensuring that the regulation is a good regulation, is a needed regulation, is a valuable regulation, and also ensuring that people aren't over-regulated, unnecessarily regulated, we're sort of kept out of the process. And again, in this case, the Source Protection Authority, and it is the Source Protection Authority, it's pretty clear to me, it says clearly, Section 34, the first title in the Act is what amendments initiated by Source Protection Authority, Section 35, amendments initiated by the minister.
That's correct.
There's no other section that says initiated by anybody else. So it's confusing and concerning to me.
Yeah, and I can see how it could be interpreted that way, and I'm not spewing legalese. If you look at the Act and the previous stages we've been through, it always says Source Protection Authority. If it means the board, it will specifically say the board. So Source Protection Authority always, under the Clean Water Act, has meant you have a Section 5 agreement that stipulates who makes decisions and how under the Source Protection Authority. You have an agreement between your three parties and who can make what decisions, which you should have a copy of. So from our perspective, the Source Protection Authority can be any part of that. How you work your local approvals is governed under that Section 5 agreement. So you'll notice in previous stages of the Clean Water Act, it'll say specifically the Source Protection Committee shall, or the Source Protection Authority shall. It doesn't say the chair of the committee or this, it's very broad to allow you to run things the way you want them to run locally. So we're not making up interpretations. It's always been that since the day the Clean Water Act was passed. And where it means committee or the authority board specifically, it will say that in the Act or supporting regulations. In addition to that, I would add that we did present over a year ago when this first came to light that consultation maybe hadn't been fully done properly. We agreed and said, absolutely, everybody needs to have more time to make sure they're on board and comfortable with this. And we presented to the authority board at the time, including the work plan for the next year, which included all this work. So it's not like it was just heard about the first time 2 months ago. I think that's a little unfair. There were many, many conversations. A working group. The municipality was asked to put forward people. There's been a lot of work. This actually started in 2011 initially, and we've had a series of events since then. So it was supposed to be part of the first submission. So that's why there is rightly a little confusion about the Section 34, because it was part of that initial amendment. But our lawyers have looked at it very closely and are very much satisfied with the number of meetings and presentations given to both the board, the committee, municipal councils, municipal staff. I think we met 3 times specifically with staff last year when this first came to light to make sure everybody was fully aware of what was happening. And, we certainly did our best, and the regulation has been followed. You are correct, though. The board has to pass, the Source Protection Authority board has to pass that resolution to submit it. Initiation, that is, the word initiate is in the title. As you know, the clause is in the Act.
You're sounding more and more like a lawyer all the time.
They're training me well, but no, it is complicated. Like every piece of legislation we have has a million interpretations depending how you look at it. If you've looked at any of it, you do need a bit of a legal degree to get through it. But there's no stretching of anything. This has been done very openly and transparently. Given an extra year when there were concerns, and we wanted everybody to be fully aware and involved, and our concern is we're aware that there are significant threats to Great Lakes intakes, and we want to make sure that those are addressed.
Can I just ask a question? I don't agree, and I guess my view is that this council should not consider this until the Source Protection Authority has adopted it. But that aside, the other comment I wanted to make is, and it goes back to what I said a second ago about elected bodies deciding how regulations are implemented, so that because elected bodies represent the people, and this isn't a brand new thing. Fuel has been identified as a risk to the Great Lakes and to the environment for generations, and that's why we have 11 statutes and regulations on the books today. 11, and that was actually produced by the Lake Erie Source Protection Authority. They did the work on that. They counted 9. I added 2 more because I think that the Planning Act and the Conservation Authorities Act also restrict it. 11 acts and statutes and regulations on the books today regulating fuel storage. So, in my view, one of 2 things has to be true. Either we've got this covered already. I mean, we just got finished going through saying that inspections are already required. The tank walls are already required. There's requirement after requirement after requirement, and so either we've got it covered or the regulations don't work, and adding number 12 to the list is not going to do anything more to keep anybody safe. And my concern is that we're asking, you know, small business owners, people in the community who are running gas stations, just gas station owners, to fill in another piece of paper, answer to another regulatory officer. You know, how many, you know, they've got people visiting them all the time, asking them to fill out paper. You know, at some point we have to ask ourselves a question. I think elected bodies need to ask themselves a question: how much of this do we need to do? So my request back to the Source Protection Committee and to the Source Protection Authority would be, first, show us all the statutes that are already on the books and explain to us what the gaps are. Where are the gaps in that, and why all together, taken together, they don't provide adequate protection? Provided some examples of where failures in a fuel station, a gas station, have contaminated a municipal water supply. That would be helpful. And, you know, I think just generally show us why this regulation is necessary in addition to all the regulation we have in place already. I would ask you to come back with that information before you ask this council to pass a resolution, because you know, I think we have to make sure that the public isn't over-regulated on this front. We have to make sure the water's safe, and we have to make sure that it's protected, but we also have to make sure that there's a balance there, and that we just don't keep adding paperwork and regulation and accomplishing not very much, except overburdening a bunch of people who are already beleaguered with regulation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Mayette, there's one. Oh, did you want to address that? Sure, go ahead.
I wouldn't mind. Just a few comments, and I'll let Carl answer on behalf of the committee. But my passion has been drinking water. I've been in drinking water with the ministry for 15 years now, and one thing lacking in those 11 pieces of legislation is any reference to your drinking water supply. And I think that's the gap we're trying to address right there, is nobody has said, you know, what could happen? Who do you notify if there's a spill? Could it get in my drinking water supply? And what these studies have done is shown that yes, it could. That in these certain volumes, this could travel within 2 hours or quicker right into your intake. So the science does support that this could get into your intake if there were a spill. I hear you, though. But none of those address drinking water. So that's what the gap is that we're trying to address. Somewhere you have to have something that says, you know what, we're aware this could be a threat to our drinking water systems, and here's how we're addressing it. Certainly at the ministry, we can't be aware of any known significant drinking water threat and not do anything about it. It would be, you know, we have a standard of care as well. So if modeling shows that this could be a real issue, you know, we have to take it seriously, and I think you do too. But I do hear you. I understand people are overregulated at the wazoo. But the exact goal of the Clean Water Act was to fill the gaps where drinking water wasn't addressed for these types of things. So that's my quick answer to that question. The second one is, I would encourage you to put those comments in writing if you still have concerns, because that's what consultation is about too, right? So whether you endorse this tonight or you don't, or another day, you need to get that in writing and submit it to the ministry or to the Source Protection Authority so they can submit it to us, and the committee can consider those comments. So that's the whole point of public consultation, is to make sure that happens, and hopefully it does. I think the policies they've come up with are very reasonable. The concern last year was there was a significant amount of prohibition in the policies. That's all gone. It's gone, and they worked through those issues and deemed that those were a bit of overkill, considering this is a hypothetical spill event. But it can happen. Like we mentioned, Sudbury happened last year, right into the lake, right into their drinking water supply. Nobody got notified because there were no policies requiring notification. There are a few other situations like that have occurred too, and where contaminated sites have affected intakes, or spills have affected intakes. So we know this can be a real concern for water, and we do just, the goal is to mitigate that risk and make sure it doesn't happen.
Okay, I think we have one more question here from Councillor Mayette.
Yeah, actually I have several questions, but I'm going to stick to one, and that is, I'm hearing all this, that these regulations apply only to municipal water intakes. So this, in our municipality, and we have several thousand residents who get their water from private or shared well systems. And these are tax-paying people, and their taxes are going towards funding these programs. and this legislation is doing nothing to protect them.
I'll start, and then it is the intent going forward to look at other non-municipal systems. At this stage, the plan was targeted at the largest groups and population that could be affected. The goal of the ministry, and I won't overstate it, but it is the drinking water program is concerned about all drinking water sources. So the evolution of the plan is to move forward and look at other sources and other users.
Yeah, and those of us who feel passionately about drinking water share your thoughts. And like Carl mentioned, the goal was in the first round to reach the biggest population first. So that's done now. So we're actively at the ministry doing what we're calling a program review. And what's next? What can we do? Do we do this on the same scale for those smaller systems? Probably not. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like for private wells and what can be done through source. That said, if you have a concern about a specific area, the Act does allow for a municipality to request a cluster of wells or a private system to be brought into the program. So if there are concerns, you can make that request through a council resolution, and through that it would be added. So that's always been there from day one. We have several of those around the province where municipalities, there's one in Blue Water where there's a private system that they were concerned maybe wasn't being managed and adequately, and wanted to make sure they had the same they knew they'd be taking it over eventually, so they wanted to ensure it had the same protection as the rest of their well supplies. So there are provisions in the Act for that. That's something we're working on this year, is what does the future of the program look like for, now that we're through this point, for private well systems, because there are hundreds, thousands of them when you get down to individual wells, but even communal systems where you've got 10, 20 houses on one well. There's a host of those. There's tons, and they're obviously a bigger concern. They're not run as well. Right?
Councillor Grace, I think we...
Just a quick clarifying question on tomorrow night's meeting. This is specifically, according to correspondence we had in our last meeting, to do with the harbor fuel tanks. Is that correct?
It's all fuel storage within that zone that we've identified.
Okay, but in our letter that we got from you, I think it identified the tanks at the harbor specifically, right? 136 Elgin Street?
That's a good point. So every affected property owner received a direct letter.
Okay, great.
But more generally, we've also broadened the consultation out to any public.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carla. I just remind people that the open house will be tomorrow from 4 to 7 here at the Plex. The other thing I'll mention is I've talked to our CAO, and he will be bringing we will not be passing a motion this evening on this. We will be bringing a staff report on the workings of the group and what our path forward will be, and some recommendations likely on the 29th of February, I suppose, the CAO. So thank you very much for this evening.
Great. Really appreciate the opportunity and time.
Thank you, Carl. Our next delegation is Scott Barry and Alan Webster from Ontario Power Generation, and they're here on the operational performance update. Welcome. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
2 times in a week for me.
Alan left me high and dry. Alan does send his apologies. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a brief update on some of our operations. First start company-wide in terms of OPG. As a reminder, we're a fairly large energy producer here in the province, producing over 50% of the electricity that's generated here in the province. We had a good year. Most important for us was the safety of our employees and safety of our production. And we've been around for over 100 years, and we're quite pleased to say that last year was one of our best safety performances ever. A lot of work on our hydroelectric facilities. We have 65 stations across the province. This is a good, clean source of energy that we continue to invest in. Some of these assets date back, Sir Adam Beck down at Niagara Falls, over 100 years, and they're very reliable with some minor modifications, refurbishment, and they can continue to run a very long and productive life. So we have about 200 initiatives and projects underway this year to continue to enhance and maximize those critical assets in the province. I'll speak to Pickering and Darlington in a moment, but just to remind Council that we do have a single shareholder. We're an incorporated company, but that shareholder is the province of Ontario, and all of the profits that we generate, and we're expected to operate efficiently and generate those profits are returned back to the province and to the ratepayers. So we are the lowest cost generator here in the province, helping moderate prices. And we also have a very clean portfolio of generation in North America, the cleanest in North America. Last year we successfully shut down and burned our last piece of coal. It was hard on our company, hard on some of our employees, but it was the right policy direction of this government, and we worked very hard to meet those aims and goals, and we've successfully done that. So it's one of the single largest climate change initiatives here in North America, and so we're very proud of our accomplishments. Looking a little more locally here in the community around our own operations that we have here at the Bruce site. As you recall, we have retained lands there for our operations, for our nuclear waste storage facilities. We too enjoyed another successful year when it came to safety, as noted, and also our skilled drivers who are really very much the public face of our operations, who travel along the highways and the byways. Moving the materials here to the facility, have worked many years safely in traveling. In terms of reliability and some of the metrics that we need to achieve as any business, we had some mixed performance when it came to our incinerator. Our incinerator is a piece of equipment that's kind of unique. Well, there's only 2 in North America, in which we help reduce the volume of the waste, the low-level waste. Provides tremendous volume efficiencies for us, about 95%, and helps enable us to not only reduce our current footprint, but the future footprint for the storage of the materials. I say our performance was mixed in terms of we didn't meet our objectives in the amount of waste volume reduced. Primarily through performance. We invested a lot of money in maintenance, so the unit was out for longer periods of this time, and we continue to invest in that to increase its reliability. Again, no safety concerns in terms of performance or emissions are well below all of the required certification for the operation of the equipment. Excuse me. Just a few other points as noted in terms of environmental performance and community involvement. So some recent announcements, some good announcements I think for this community in terms of the nuclear industry that our industry partner Bruce announced around major component replacement, and for us at Darlington. So Darlington is one of the top performing nuclear stations in the world. It's an asset that we've invested a lot of money over the years to maintain to some exceptionally high standards. And it makes sense in terms of the economics, in terms of continuing good, strong base load of nuclear energy from an environmental perspective to invest in that to extend its life another 30 to 35 years. Darlington produces enough electricity to support about 1 in 5 homes and businesses in Ontario. So it makes sense to continue to invest in that asset. It is a large project. It's a project that is costed out around a little over $12 billion. But there's some good news in that in terms of the investment of where that's coming from. About 96% of all the investment in this project, in terms of the ancillary businesses that provide the components, the pieces, the works, the contractors, are right here in Ontario. So the actual net benefit to Ontario in terms of the GDP is about $14.9 billion. So for every dollar spent, we're actually getting a higher return on that investment here in Ontario. Notwithstanding jobs, around 8,800 jobs, both indirect and direct, as a result of this 12 to 13-year project. We'll be taking one unit offline at the end of this year, and it takes about 36 months to refurbish that unit. We'll then pause. We'll take a look at our successes. We'll review the OPEX of that and our learnings from that. And that's an on-ramp and an off-ramp for our ministry and for our minister based on our production and our commitments of meeting this on time and on schedule as to whether additional refurbishment comes. So again, there's a number of risks are being managed, risks are being mitigated throughout the project. And some other notables, I think, in terms of the number of megatons of greenhouse gas that are saved. Maybe shadowing this big announcement in terms of Darlington was our sister station, Pickering. It's the oldest in the fleet, and it was slated to shut down in 2020. The government's asked us to look at the possibility of extending that life to 2024, so an additional 4 years. So we're doing the work on that and the analysis of the components to ensure that we can continue to operate Pickering and to maximize its full life over 2024. This will also help with the major refurbishments of both Bruce and our own facilities when some of those units are taken offline. So it'll help bridge some of the generation gaps or the needs in the province. And some good points with respect to Pickering's continued operations and maximizing that investment. Turning to a couple of projects, the Deep Geologic Repository, a project well known to this council and community as it's now in its 15th year. And we're now still progressing through the federal reviews process. It's been a 4-year process of an extensive consultation of years of studies and investments have been put forward to the Joint Review Panel for consideration to review the facts and the science-based facts that are put forward. The JRP, as you recall, in May, after their conclusion of their 33 days of hearings and evidence brought forth by both experts and the public, over 200 interventions, assessed that information and the science of that rendered that a decision that the minister, they recommended to the minister that approval be granted on the environmental assessment. And there's a strong safety case that the JRP recognized as in terms of the technical feasibility. So that's with the minister. The minister had indicated the need for an extension on that decision, and the current date is projected around March 1st. So the ministry continues to work on the review of those documents to put forth a decision on that. But that's just one step in many steps still to go. An important step, but if there is a decision rendered by the minister, then she has the ability, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, to forward that on to the Joint Review Panel to give consideration for a license. That license, again, is only to construct the site. It is not a license to operate. That'll come down the road many years down the road after, if it is built, then we seek a license to operate. So that's an update on the DGR. And lastly, just speak about our own operations. Again, the operations here at the Western facility on the Bruce site is for the interim storage of Ontario's low and intermediate level waste from the 3 nuclear stations. We currently hold a 10-year license. And with other facilities like our nuclear stations, these are licenses that come up for periodic review by the regulator. Our license is due in 2017, and we will be again seeking a 10-year license. So we'll need to do our work, assess our performance, present that to the CNSC, and give proof and evidence on our ability so that we've safely managed our operations, but also the kinds of conditions we're going to put in place, the procedures we're going to change, the equipment investments we're going to make to ensure that we can continue to meet the obligations of that license for another 10 years. It's also an opportunity for us to make some business assumptions, to look down the road. There's still a lot of uncertainty with the DGR project, a lot of uncertainty around APM, so our near-term goal is to continue our operations to help support the nuclear facilities here in Ontario and manage the waste and process the waste on an interim basis. So we've re-snapped the chalk line, looking out about 15 years, because sometimes there may be the requirement to start to put facilities in at the tail of that license, but though they may not be needed to a subsequent license. So we've done a lot of work in making some business planning assumptions and looking farther out. We foresee the need to expand some of our footprint, some additional storage space. Anticipation of refurbishment does generate more low-level waste as a result of units that are offline. I spoke around Pickering's continued operations, so we anticipate some more low-level waste as a result of those operations. The other way in which we generate the availability of storage of space is we've recently undertaken last year a couple of pilot projects to go back into low-level waste that's been stored for a number of decades. We pulled out a number of those bins, and randomly we pulled out 80 bins, and we were able to, through more pristine sorting, and reduce those down to 14 bins. So we're seeing an achievement around 3 to 1. I think this was a very clear message that we heard at the hearings, that we need to do all we can with the waste that we have to either recycle it, reduce the volume of that, so that truly there's nothing left that we can do with the waste. I'd also point out that through the recycling, a lot of those materials that were in those bins, through staff's conservative approach of, if in doubt, throw it out because we collect it and it's in a waste stream and it's trapped. We were able to pull out about 22,000 pounds of metal and recycle that. It was uncontaminated, and sell it back into the metal market. So we're finding a lot of recyclables that we were able to draw out that in fact weren't contaminated and put back into the typical public mainstream. So we're working hard on enhancing and increasing our abilities on that. So we're asking in this upcoming license, we're looking at upgrading our facilities, putting in a more robust waste sorting facility that we can go in and provide more rigor and efforts on our processes that we have. So more on that to come in the months ahead as we approach the license hearing. That's what I'd hope to come forth to Council today, to provide a brief update, a few summary points there for your consideration. If there's any questions from Mayor or Council, I'd be happy to address those.
Thanks very much, Scott. Questions for Scott? Councillor Grease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Scott, I've got a question. I don't know if anybody read in the news, but less than 2 weeks ago there was a rock slide at the Andra Underground Research Laboratory in Bure, France. That stands for the French National Radioactive Waste Management Agency. It killed one worker, injured another. This was reported by the New York Times and the BBC. A rock face collapsed while technicians were conducting tests, and an investigation is underway. The reason why it, I think, is significant to our planned DGR in Kincardine is because the rock formation there is argillaceous limestone, which is similar to the limestone that we are planning to build in Kincardine. So I guess my question is, what consideration have you been giving in the last couple of weeks to this incident, given the parallels to the proposed site?
One of the things that I wouldn't say necessarily unique to our industry, but one of the things that we hold as a very sort of foundation of the culture of our safety is to rely on OPEX, and that's sort of using the operational experience. This is one of those examples. We've been in touch with them to seek the details of that, and as an industry we continue to share those lessons learned to apply them to ourselves. It was clearly an unfortunate part. It's part of the engineering process. There was no waste stored in that facility. It is currently under construction, and we'll be reviewing those to see if there's any things that we can apply to our future if we get approval in terms of our excavation of those same materials. It's a mining construction project.
Thank you. It's an underground research laboratory, right?
Right?
It's never intended to store any waste.
No, there
may
be some materials
site.
used in the form of the research.
Right. So it's my understanding that while Canada did have a URL in Granite in Manitoba, that's not operational anymore, and we've never had something similar in argillaceous limestone or any kind of shale or anything like that. Is that something that OPG would consider at this point because sometimes URLs are actually on site, and from my reading it looks like the industry recommends that that's best practice, is to try to do some kind of either site-specific URL or otherwise. That's one of the safest ways to proceed. Is that something that OPG might consider?
It is, and I can't recall the specifics in terms of, we're at a stage where we'll start to, if it goes forward, to advance the engineering of that, and that's where we'll start to pull upon that expertise of the mining expertise to actually develop the plans in terms of the excavation of the site.
Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, thanks, Scott, for the presentation. Scott, could you just briefly touch on the process with the Ministry of the Environment, Federal Ministry of the Environment, and where you're at specifically with the DGR approval process for the next stage, which I guess is the environmental assessment?
So just a little background. Again, I can't speak on behalf of the Minister, but I can speak to the process. So just as a reminder, the Minister is rendering a decision on the environmental assessment. All of the work, the studies we've done have been put forward, the environmental safety case, all of that information. The JRP took all of that information and they reviewed it from an environmental assessment piece through SIA, through the regulations that guide the conditions and the scopes of that investigation. So they've rendered a recommendation that is with the Minister for approval. So that's just the environmental assessment portion. If a decision from the minister is forthcoming in terms of approving the environmental assessment, then it goes back to the JRP, who has the accountability that was jointly hired both by C and by the CNSC, to then give consideration and thought to the actual license, because then they license the stages of development, just like they would with a nuclear facility, from new build to operations to eventual decommissioning and abandonment. That's with the minister.
If there's no further questions, thanks very much for the update. It's always nice to see you in the chamber, Scott.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
The next item on the agenda is again our third delegation. This evening it is Jim Henning from the Southampton Residents Association, and he's here via an update. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and councillors. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I was here approximately 1 year ago, almost exactly, giving you an outline of Southampton Residents Association and discussing concerns at that time. I'd like to first of all go over briefly the items that I talked about then. One of the things that we did a members survey prior to that meeting, and the first concern of our members is water quality in Lake Huron. And two initiatives we took as Southampton Residents Association in response to that. We started a Chantry Family Fun Day, which took place last early July. Had an environmental educational component for children, the Yellowfish program. And secondly, we had at our AGM, we had a guest speaker from Grey Bruce Health Unit, Andrew Barton, who's responsible for beach water testing up and down the peninsula. I'd like to thank very much the Deputy Mayor for the help he gave us with our Chantry Family Fun Day. He smoothed the way into Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, and they were very helpful. They came up with a suggestion for the Yellowfish program and helped us implement it. I'd like to thank Council because they approved the operation of the Yellowfish program. And the other people that were very helpful in connection with that program was the South Saugeen Shores Life-Saving Club, who came and did a demonstration on life-saving. We had a bunch of activities. We had a free lunch. We had music. It was a good program. And we were quite happy with it, and we'll be running it again this year. This year's educational component will be probably be something based on recycling, because there's very little recycling that goes on at that site, which is right beside Cherry's Fries. And again, looking to the future, the speaker at our AGM this coming year will be Shannon Wood from the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, who's going to talk about what's coming down the river, which should be interesting. Last year, again, I spoke about the Island Street storm sewer and the blot that it is on a very popular section of beach. I want to thank the mayor for asking staff to do a cost analysis of what it would cost to reroute that along Lake Street. That seemed to be fairly high cost at the time, but studies still continue on that. Jeff Peach of the Lake Huron Coastal Conservation LHCCC, whatever it is, has proposed several areas for possible study, and the Southampton or Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority is involved. So I'm hopeful sometime that something will be done about that. Finally, last year I spoke about dogs and bicycles on the beach, which takes up an enormous amount of time in our board meetings. And the amendments that were passed last year to the animal control bylaw that allowed people to walk their dogs up and down the boardwalk were very helpful, and that seems to have died out. Bicycles still remain a problem because of the blind entrances, but the bylaw enforcement officer wanders up and down and stops that on a fairly regular basis, and I'm not sure what else can be done. The stencils that were put in the sidewalk didn't have any noticeable effect. So looking forward, as I say, we're running the Chantry Family Fun Day again. We had about 75 children involved last year with their parents and grandparents, and we learned some things about how to do that better. So we're doing that again. And as I mentioned, we got Shannon Wood at our AGM. Last summer at our AGM, there was concern expressed regarding traffic in the area of the tennis courts, the beach access, the small lanes and streets west of Huron Street between Morpeth and South. And Stuart Doyle did some work on that, and we would like to make sure that his successor continues to follow that up. One of our directors, Peter Stork, has spent many hours in a labor of love trying to encourage the town's planning staff and planning advisory committee to incorporate changes in the proposed revisions to the zoning bylaw. His suggestions have been totally rejected by staff and neither adopted nor discussed by the Planning Advisory Council. We're hopeful that that council would consider whether adoption of some of these suggestions would result in a long-term benefit to the town. So I'd like to talk to a couple of those aspects particularly. One aspect is the Southampton Parkways District study. The Southampton Parkways District is a fancy way of describing the highway entrances into and out of town. And the second thing I'd like to talk about is the High Street downtown core. But first of all, I think I would like the council to recognize the difference between the communities of Port Elgin and Southampton. Port Elgin, according to the official plan, its objective is to become a regional commercial center. According to the official plan, Southampton is to develop as a tourist-oriented waterfront community, historical waterfront community. Southampton really is the poor end of town. It's got a lower standard of living, a lower income level compared to the Port Elgin end of town, and it's much more dependent on the tourist industry. So that having that town develop as a tourist center with various amenities in that respect is very important. At this point in time, I'd like to say that how happy we are to see the town hall become a home for the Bruce County players and the professional actors of Saugeen Shores. But that's the type of development that I think this town, Southampton, needs. I know the staff and I know some council members want to have uniform provisions throughout the municipality, but other municipalities successfully encourage diversity in development bylaws and in guidelines. In this way, they shape development and provide the foundation for a more vibrant tourist industry. This is not about setting Port Elgin against Southampton. As the official plan outlines, they have different development objectives. So, turning to the Parkways, Parkways study, this was done in 2009 with a lot of municipal input from Bruce County staff, from town staff, from the public, and it studied the highway entrances with recommendations as to how they would be developed with buildings that are oriented to the street, with parking at one side or at the rear, with attractive landscaping, with limited signage, low intensity, and downward directed lighting. It's our opinion that these should be incorporated into the zoning bylaw. Staff says they're more appropriate in the site plan agreements, but I believe there'll be more teeth if they're in the zoning bylaw, as done by other municipalities. The second point I'd like to talk about is the downtown core, Southampton's High Street. And I think many of these comments also apply to the downtown of Port Elgin. We have many vacancies. Some of them have gone on for a number of years, and a number of aging business owners who will be looking for an exit strategy within the next 5 or 10 years. So the official plan objective says that we should be supporting healthy and vibrant downtowns in Port Elgin and Southampton. There's some other quotes in the official plan. The core in One quote is it's an objective to maintain the role of core areas as community gathering places and as the commercial and social focal points of the settlement area and surrounding farm community. And further on, to encourage highway commercial developments that do not adversely affect the commercial activities contained in the core commercial designation. And as an example of this, it's unfortunate that the drugstore in Southampton moved out to the highway. As far as taking the focal point of the community and eviscerating High Street, that could be the start of a bad trend. Worries about the post office perhaps moving in the same direction. If another financial institution came into town, I think the preference would be to have it on High Street rather than out on the highway. So that the core of controlling or shaping development in this area is controlling the uses, getting the uses right, and minimizing the overlap so that somebody coming in with development ideas knows where they should be going or looking for a spot. I think that the Hazel McCallan, if I can go back to Hurricane Hazel McCallan, famously said that never, to councillors, never forget that you are representing the great silent majority. And I think if you ask people in Southampton whether they support the Parkways plan, whether they support reinforcing High Street, doing everything that can be done in zoning to keep a healthy High Street, they would say yes. I believe that the majority of Port Elgin people would also, and township people, would also say yes. They would like to see Southampton develop in this manner. So I would like Council to direct staff to consider how to implement the vision in the Southampton Parkways plan and to consider how the zoning bylaw could better protect the downtown cores of both Southampton and Port Elgin as focal points of their community by revisiting the allowed uses in both. I hope that could be done so that Council would have a way of seeing what could be done, listen to staff why it should not be done, and then do the right thing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions or comments? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question through you to Mr. Henning and then a comment. I actually have read Mr. Stork's submissions and actually met with him and talked about them. I'm just curious, at your meetings, have you ever arrived at sort of a top three list? You know, when you say, you know, about downtown Southampton requiring, you know, this diligence and this attention, do you have a suggestion as to like a top priority there? Because we've tried a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'm just curious, has a group sort of, would there be something that you would see as one of the first things we should try or do downtown?
I think the most important thing is to get the uses right so that people know exactly where they're going to go if they want to have a particular type of facility. And in our view, there's too much duplication now between the uses in downtown and the uses on the highway. Had the pharmacy not been a duplication of uses, perhaps it would not have gone out to the highway.
Just as a comment then, and I believe I've had this conversation with you before, we as a council couldn't force the drugstore to stay downtown. And quite frankly, my sense of the vibe or the mood in Southampton was people there wanted to have a drugstore in Southampton. So for the kind of business they Rexall needed to have to compete with the likes of the pharmacy at Walmart, the pharmacy at the Independent, and the previously the drugstores in Port Elgin, and Shoppers Drug Mart too. Thank you, Councillor Myatt. They needed the space that wasn't available downtown. So as much as I was saddened to see them leave the Main Street, because I completely agree with you, it's an incredible void there, because it's the kind of place that once or twice a week you might have went in there for something.
Yeah.
It was an anchor store downtown for sure, not unlike previous anchors downtown, the IGA drugstore being another one that I can think of from when I was a kid. But I really can't begrudge, the drugstore, Rexall, making that decision, because they needed to have a business that gave them a chance at succeeding in Southampton. So I would rather have them out on the highway than not have them there at all. And quite frankly, since they created a different kind of drugstore situation in Southampton, it has longer hours, which has been extremely helpful to a lot of people in town. So I'm not unhappy about that. I think we dropped the ball on the site plan on that one, though, so I'll definitely agree with you, as I have in the past, about that. But I just think it's important that we keep in mind that people actually live in both Port Elgin and Southampton all year round. And so we should be cognizant of the fact that those people are deserving of certain kinds of stores and retail opportunities and that sort of thing. So in my conversations with Mr. Stork, we often ended up in this place where he said, well, that's not needed here. And I'm like, well, hang on a second. Why should people from Southampton have to go somewhere else to get that? And so I appreciate everything you're saying and agree with quite a bit of it. And I was at those meetings about the Parkway stuff, so you're right. It's been enough time. We should be doing something. But quite frankly, one of the sides of the highway, at least on the way in from Port Elgin, one side is not big enough for any kind of development to happen on it beyond the rail trail that's there already. So, that's kind of just sitting there. But I'm not too sure that we haven't already got all the protections there. And I guess we can't force particular businesses to stay in the locations that they're at. I understand what you're saying about use, but sometimes the amount of space that a business needs to be successful is just not available downtown. And unfortunately for Southampton, quite frankly, that means today's drugstore, today's grocery store, there's just not that much space downtown. So I hear you on some things, but I listen to other people too that would rather have some things there than not there. And so if the only place they can be is a little bit out from downtown, and we've done what we can to improve sidewalk access out to that part of town and that sort of thing. It's not ideal, but it's at least they're there. So thank you for the presentation, and I certainly wish you success with the kids thing down at the lake, because I'm a firm believer that the more kids get a little bit of education, the future has a little greater chance at success. So thank you for doing that.
If I could respond, I think that if the zoning had been such as to not allow a pharmacy both places, there might have been more incentive for the drugstore to stay downtown. I don't know whether they're being tremendously successful in that location or not, but and I've certainly there should be a drugstore someplace.
Thank you. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jim. I guess my question is directed to our development officer, Art, and that is on the question of incentive. And this might be something we can't answer right now, but I would like to know more about what we can do to provide incentives for businesses in our downtown core to either sell or start operating. Because a big concern, I think, with our vitality of our downtowns is the fact that we have vacant storefronts, not just in Southampton, in Port Elgin too. And I'd really like us to try to solve that problem, or at least start working on it. So I don't know if that's kind of unfair putting that on Bart right now, but it's something I'd like us to.
Sure. I think, pending what happens in the next item, our budget there, we do have an economic development officer included in the budget, and I suspect that would be the person or position that we could task with that, those types of things anyway. Thanks very much, Jim. The next item on the agenda is public notice, and it's a staff report to do with the 2016 budget. Excuse me. And our treasurer, Sue Den, is going to present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following several capital and operating budget review meetings, council and staff have finalized the 2016 budget process with a projected total tax levy increase of $850,904. That includes new tax dollars provided through growth of 1.84% and a final levy increase of 5.8%. When combined with the county increase of 3.66% and assuming a 0% increase from the school boards, the overall blended rate increase is anticipated to be 3.94%. These budgets required significant reductions from our initial presentations to avoid a preliminary levy increase that was in excess of 12%. Subsequent to the budget meeting on January 20th, all the department heads further reviewed their budget requests and made further adjustments to their operating budgets. These included a combination of revenue and expense line items and resulted in a further decrease in the levy of $183,200, or an additional 1.65%. That did include an additional drawdown of the tax stabilization reserve, and while the recommendation from the budget meeting sought a 1% decrease, this would have resulted in drawing down our reserve to below zero, so we have included a $90,000 transfer from the reserve to bring the current balance of that reserve to zero. The 2016 budget includes $40,000, which represents the 2016 contribution to the Saugeen Memorial Hospital campaign for the ER expansion, and our final payment for that will be in 2017. The budget also reflects the requested decrease of $10,000 to the Police Services Board budget, which was approved at a recent meeting of the Police Services Board. The increase to the tax-funded capital budget for 2016 is just under $50,000. This is an increase of only 0.44% over 2015 levels. There are several attachment schedules to the report, including the summary of each department's burden on the tax levy, the 2016 capital budget program, the capital carry forward, so work that will be completed, anticipated to be completed in 2016 that was part of the 2015 budget process, and updated projected reserve and reserve fund activities to the end of 2016. The tax levy proposed of $12,067,191 does include PIL revenue of $87,352. So the actual levy increase is proposed tax levy is $11,979,839. Say that again, $11,979,839. Thank you. Too many numbers.
You're good at numbers, Sue. Very good. Anyways, the recommendation is that the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Saugeen Shores approves the municipal budget for the year 2016 as follows. Expenditures, operating and reserves of $24,399,114. Of that will be capital will be $7,903,185 for a total 2016 budget expenditures of $32,302,299. That will be supported by revenues of operating and reserves of $13,599,285, capital of $6,635,823 for a total 2016 budget revenues of $20,235,108. The total municipal taxation on operating and reserves will be $10,799,829. Capital from taxation will be $1,267,362 for a total 2016 budget of $12,067,191. That the Town of Saugeen Shores tax levy be set at $12,067,191 to finance the operating and capital budgets of the municipality for the year 2016. This levy includes growth of $205,014 or 1.84%, and a levy increase of $645,890, excuse me, or 5.80%, for a total levy increase of $850,904. That the BIA levies for 2016 be set at $33,000 for the Port Elgin BIA and $29,350 for the Southampton BIA. That the total tax levy bylaw establishing the 2016 tax rates be considered by council at a future date. Okay, and I have a motion, I have an amendment to that I'll read, and I guess we'll deal with the amendment. We'll discuss that first, and then we'll go back to, depending on the main motion, how this goes. It's been moved by Councillor Minaj and seconded by Councillor Dave Mayette to amend 5.1.1 staff report of the 2016 budget to add sufficient new funding or reassign the pool drawing funding to enable a funding and planning subcommittee in 2016 to adequately prepare for a 2017 construction schedule for the new police detachment. So I guess we'll try and deal, I guess, with the amendment first. And you can speak to it, Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I had 2 points to the budget. I'll speak to this one first. And so this is our second budget, and we have carried forward a request from the Chief of Police for funding to construct a new detachment for several years. In fact, in the 2013 budget for the 5-year plan, it was anticipated that the construction build would take place in 2015. So each successive year after, we've been able to keep pushing this out and pushing it out and pushing it out. So the CAO even contends in his report to us at the back end of our meeting today that we had a chance early in our term at the vision priority setting, and we rated it as a 38th overall. And I would contend that that was somewhat unfair, because at that time I certainly didn't have the stack of papers that the chief gave us most recently to say that essentially he's given us multiple reasons why this project cannot be delayed further. His references include many statements with the inference that our community could be held liable for essentially our inaction as a board of directors. So if we were, this report from Larry suggests that it will be built in 2017, and that we should hear more about it coming up after they have their meeting on the 24th of February. That should be good news for all of us, and including the chief. However, in order for construction to start in 2017, there are much more requirements: location, size, costing, shared services plans, as well as letting the contract and organizing the appropriate financial plan. It is my partner here, our Vice Deputy Mayor, who often speaks to projects that have their time and place, and Diane has often expressed concern that some projects jump over others that have waited patiently for their time. It is my contention that this project, its time is now, and I know that we're saying it will happen in 2017, but I believe we should be responsible to advance those final planning and acceptance requirements to this year. So my amendment is asking for funding, either new funding to be added or funding to be moved from another project that will allow a committee to get all the ducks lined up so that construction can start New Year 2017. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and certainly Councilor Minaj raises some good points, and certainly they, correct that the police building has been a project which has really been on the books and been under consideration for, nearly a decade now, for a very, very long time, and one which doesn't go away with each one of those passing years. Council a number of years ago, I can't remember what year it was exactly, but established a police building reserve with the intent of setting money aside in order to do design drawings for a new facility. Some of that money was spent over time to do some conceptual designs, each one of which was not brought forward, largely due to the extreme cost of them at the time, and those costs haven't gone down, they're only going up. One positive thing is $75,000 remains in the police building reserve, and will remain there in 2016 if we approve the budget. And I think that gives us a good starting off point to work with. I think before we move forward with anything or anything comes to this council, the board has got to go back, look at its needs again, in concert with the chief and the officers in the service, and decide, what level or what type of facility needs to be constructed. And it's entirely possible that those proposals which have come forward in the past may not be brought forward again, that we will find other avenues. But I think we have funding to work with here, $75,000. I would suggest that we don't go throwing out projects that we've already discussed and put into the budget. There's money here, we can work with it, and that gives us what we need to go forward, I think, through 2016 toward the end that you're looking at, Councilor Minaj, which is to actually get a project off the ground, which we need to do. But I think we have the resources already in the budget without an amendment to do that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think we don't need another committee. We have a committee, and it's called the Police Services Board. That's perfectly adequate at identifying the needs of the police service. So I couldn't support another committee that would be another committee of the Police Services Board. This is really the mandate of the Police Services Board, and I think it should stay there. And I agree with you, Luke. I think there's adequate money to get this thing to the point where council can make the decision, and that's the point. And we've had those discussions at budget a number of times, and here we are with this budget as it is tonight, and I'm not going to support this amendment. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
I won't be supporting the amendment either. However, I did want to ask a question. Just because there's money sitting in Police Services Building Fund Reserve, at the moment we haven't done anything in the budget process that enables that money to be accessed for what Councilor Minaj is talking about. However, the fact that that money is sitting there in reserve would mean that after the budget is passed, we could revisit this and access that fund at that point. Is that logical sort of progression of thought there? Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to have that clarified. So in 2016, we could get a report from the Police Services Board that says they want to access that money so the building can start in 2017. Is that a correct assumption?
Absolutely.
Okay, so my problem with your comment about how the Police Services Board has control over this is we got a letter from the Police Association, we got a letter and documents from the chief directed at us as a board of directors. And it's us that passes the budget, and we as council I didn't look to build a new police detachment last year. This is my second time, and I'm asking that we look to build one now so that as a member of this board of directors, I'm not held liable for a problem that could occur due to all of those issues that he rose in his report.
Councillor Mayat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I seconded the motion, and I think that the motion has served a very good purpose here today, and that is to highlight the need, and it is an urgent need for a new facility for the police. They've been languishing in the facility that they're in, and as a member of the Police Services Board, we're not reminded of it at every meeting, but we are, just by the fact that we're in that building, we see the tight quarters they're in, and the liabilities that are associated with living in tight quarters, and the type of work that the police are doing these days, I've become keenly aware is vastly changing. The types of crimes they're encountering are vastly changing. It's not just a drunken disorderly and kids breaking into somebody's garage anymore. They're dealing with some real big city issues, and we owe them what we should do and what we need to do is to get them a facility in which they can expand and do their jobs properly. So I don't believe this motion is necessary. I think that it's served a purpose, and we will, as members of the Police Services Board, take this into due consideration to get it on a schedule for 2017.
Okay. Any other comments to the amendment then? Okay, then I'll call the question. All in favor of the amendment? Opposed? That's defeated. So we'll go back to the main motion now, or the main recommendation, which was the budget as presented by Sue. If there's any questions, then we'll start over here with Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We, as you recall, as council will recall, we left the last budget meeting with one item outstanding, which isn't really clarified in the report, and I wonder if you could clarify for us, and that's the GIS positions. Council didn't make a decision, deferred it until now. So could you just clarify where those positions stand in the budget as presented? And yeah, please clarify that.
I think Larry will address that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The contract GIS position is funded through the course of 2016 at the contract rate, and the extra students that were proposed are removed.
Councillor Minaj. Oh, sorry.
Are you sure? Okay, thanks. So the second point was being able to, I'd like to be able to come back with a notice of motion and a report to the striking committee and ask for, yeah, I'm feeling that this process, this annual budget process can be improved upon, and I was hoping to come back and make a request that the next budget be our last one for this term of council, and that we look into a 2-year budget. So I'm hoping to look for support for that, Mr. Mayor.
You, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions, maybe clarifications for me. In the list of deferrals, there was the deferral of the remote connectivity project related to the harbor. And I believe in our January 20th budget meeting, there was a motion to fund this through the harbor budget. But it looks like this has now been deferred completely. Could you clarify that? Is that true? Or am I misreading that?
No, we did defer it. We looked at the balance in the Harbor Reserve Fund, and there's simply not funds there to support it at this time.
Okay. Well, I just want to, I'm a bit disappointed with that, because I think that having that as a service, as an amenity for harbor users is important. But hopefully we will be able to work on that with our waterfront plans. My other question was just in Schedule B, there is a column that has funding listed just as other for, and I don't have a page, but for waste management for $60,000 and for tourist campgrounds LED retrofit for $3,500, and I just wondered what that other source was.
The other source for the tourist camp is a projected rebate associated with the installation of the LED lighting. And just find waste management here. Right. Yeah, the waste management funding of $60,000 will be funded from the waste management operating budget.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed, if any? That's carried. I want to take this time and thank all the staff for the effort that we put in here. These are always lengthy meetings, but particularly I want to say thank to you, Sue. I know you took over this in a pretty kind of an unusual situation, and from my perspective, you've done a fabulous job, and we want to thank you for that. I know it was probably a little stressful for you there for a couple of meetings, but you've done a great job, so thanks. The next item on the agenda is a general government staff report, and it has to do with an encroachment agreement with Highbury Farms Incorporated. And we see that, and our clerk, Linda White, will present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Highbury Farm has requested permission to place a 20-inch plastic conduit under the rail trail to allow an irrigation line to be fed through the conduit on a seasonal basis. The irrigation line will service Highbury Farm's crops located on both sides of the rail trail. This is a new encroachment, and according to the encroachment policy, may be denied on such basis. However, staff have reviewed this request and are of the opinion that a conduit can effectively be installed under the rail trail, provided that both ends of the conduit are capped when the irrigation line is not in place. Capping the conduit will prevent drainage water from flowing through the pipe. A representative of the Saugeen Rail Trail Association has been advised of the proposed installation of the conduit and has expressed no objection to the installation. The attached agreement outlines the standard conditions of the town's encroachment agreement policy and provides the following specifications. And basically, Highbury Farms is to hire the contractor who's approved by the town to install the conduit and restore the site to the rail trail's satisfaction and to the town's satisfaction. The Saugeen Rail Trail Association is to be notified of undertaking the work prior to the work being undertaken, and they're also obligated in the agreement to cap the pipe, as previously mentioned. The term of the agreement is going to be for 10 years or until Highbury Farms' lease of the property expires, whichever occurs earlier.
Thank you, Linda. And the recommendation is that Council pass a bylaw to authorize an encroachment agreement with Highbury Farms Incorporated. Questions, comments? Councillor Mayette. I can say just Mayette tonight because we only have one Mayette.
I got to make up for the other guy.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understood everything that was presented there, except for the very last sentence, which was the lease agreement for 10 years. Which part of it is being leased?
So there's a piece of property on, I'm going to call it the south side of the rail trail, that's not owned by Highbury Farms, but is actually a leased piece of property.
Oh, okay, so they farm a piece of municipal property, okay.
Sorry, a privately owned property. They have a private lease agreement with the landowner. Okay.
Any further questions? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So, the next item on the agenda is a Community Services, Parks and Recreation staff report, and has to do with a lease agreement with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and our Director of Community Services, Jane Jagielowski, will present.
Thank you. Again, we're looking at a 5-year lease agreement for our Port Elgin and Southampton harbors with the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans. This is a standard 5-year lease agreement. The lease is calculated at 20% of all gross revenue derived from the management and operations of both harbors. The 2015 lease amount paid to the Ministry was $77,720 plus HST. Any additional subleases that the municipality has, such as in the case with the Harbour Light Restaurant, shall not exceed the date as a municipal lease agreement. There has been no change to this lease agreement, and again, I've indicated the financial impact.
Thank you, Jane. And then the recommendation is that Council considers a bylaw to authorize a lease agreement between the Town of Saugeen Shores and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada to be renewed for a further 5 years with an expiry date of December the 31st, 2021. Questions, comments? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's no chance we can, part of the lease agreement says that the rent payable is $500 per annum or 20% of the gross revenue plus taxes. There's no way we can hit them up for just $500, eh? It's whichever is less.
We've tried everything.
Actually, we've met with the Member of Parliament and investigated some options about that, and we're under the understanding that there's not much sympathy for our case. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, my first question is also about that topic because sounds like we negotiated, as the report indicates. So this is negotiable, and it's not necessarily a standard practice like with other harbors. I mean, do all harbors, like Kincardine, Tobermory, they all pay this 20%?
They do, and I've had conversations with a number of the harbors, including Thornbury, Lions Head. They all begrudgingly sign the check and pay Oceans and Fisheries. Now, in saying that, I am optimistic to see what the strategic or the planning process will look like. We've got that funding approved now to bring in a firm to take a look at our operations, so hopefully there may be some opportunities here. Creative.
Okay, thank you. Now, I've got two other questions, if I could, please. Under the Environmental Protection Clause, which is number 23, that's page 73 of our agenda. It talks about that there shouldn't be any use or processing or storage of any kind of toxic substances. And so I'm assuming the fuel and the fuel tanks, the fuel that we're using doesn't have any toxics, what would be classified as toxic substances under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and also that our fuel tanks there are in good repair?
They are, and our tanks are religiously inspected annually, and we are in good standings with both of our tanks.
Okay, and my last question. On page 76 of the agenda, there's a red border on the map. Does that denote the area within federal jurisdiction in the agreement?
Oh, sorry.
Or is that just... Yeah, I know it is, but I'm wondering about that red, orange, brown line.
Denotes the harbor area for the lease?
But yes, and that's the area that's...
Correct.
Okay. So it also talks, Clause 27 talks about fire, and that we take all necessary precautions against fire occurring in or on the premises. And given the fact that we've had several fires in both harbors in the last couple of years, are we planning on providing any kind of additional fire prevention information to users of the harbors?
We do, and we also do exercises with our staff annually as mandated, and that's in conjunction with the fire chief as well. Part of all of our training now includes all of that. Certainly the fire this past fall was unique in that our operations were closed at that time, but it's certainly part of our training annually with our staff.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
I had two questions. The first one was also about the fuel tanks, and I can appreciate that you said that they're inspected. I would suggest that we take a really good look at the legislation that is required, because I'm not convinced that the fuel tanks are in compliance anymore. So just to be on the safe side, I say this because I've been involved in different ways with a construction company that has been hired by DFO to move tanks at other harbors. So just keep that on the...
Regulations were actually changed this past year, so we are up to date with their most current testing processes, unless they've changed them since past fall.
It's not about testing, it's about location and the distance to the water. But anyway, and the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was last year the federal government announced this massive investment for the Port Elgin Harbor. Is that still a go, and when might we see some action on that?
Yeah, I was hoping we would have seen a copy of their of a draft of their tender at this point. They did say in the spring, but I've not seen anything yet from the DFO.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wondered, Jane, or maybe perhaps the CAO could make a comment if there's been any further discussion in the last number of years on the subject of divestiture with the federal government. I know that that was a matter that had been discussed previously, quite a while previously. At $77,000 a year in payments, there's an argument to be made that divestiture could be a better way for us to approach running the harbor if we continue to want to be the operators of it. So I just wonder if that's a conversation. I know that Owen Sound is discussing divestiture at the moment with their harbor, and it's something they obviously have an ear in with the federal government to discuss it with. So I just wonder if there's been any work on our end on that front.
There is a list of active harbors that the department is entertaining divestiture, and this one is not one of them right now. But it doesn't say that we couldn't ask for that. And if we were, this may be a very good question for the strategic plan that we're doing here this year, would be to ask whether it would be worthwhile asking for divestiture of that and what that would entail. But I did look, there's a list, if you go to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, of active harbors that they are currently trying to, going through the process of divestiture. Any further questions? All in favor of the recommendation? That's carried. So we've got 7 items there, most of their minutes of the... Oh, sorry. I want to get going. Sorry. There is one more report. Thank you, Larry. I could have jumped over it. It has to do with the waterfront maintenance plan. And again, Jane, our Director of Community Services, will present.
Yeah, so what I provided you this evening is a copy of the Saugeen Shores Waterfront maintenance plan that staff have been working on for a number of months. Within the report, I've identified the areas that we considered as part of the plan, and we've shared a copy with the key stakeholders, and we appreciated their feedback that we've received to date. From that feedback, there have been a number of additional areas that were suggested we enhance, and I've identified them here in the report, and we'll certainly work with the key stakeholders to get those suggestions to fruition. If approved by Council, staff will be relying on this document as the basis for determining the frequency and extent of ongoing maintenance to be provided to each section of the shoreline described. In responding to inquiries or complaints, the plan will be referred to as Council's expectation for the level of service to be provided by staff. With the addition of the new Parks Manager and the Waterfront lead hand, the Waterfront will now have dedicated staff to deal with these issues, concerns, planning, and overall maintenance of the waterfront.
Thank you, Jane. Then the recommendation is that Council endorse the attached waterfront maintenance plan as the minimum level of service to be provided to the Saugeen Shores waterfront. Questions or comments? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions for Jane, if I may. For Area 10, which is the area in Southampton north of the river, last year there were a couple of questions that I received from constituents who live in that area, and I noticed in the report that I don't believe that these services are provided. One is that there is concern about debris, logs, and I'm pitching to see if there's any way we can sort of check that out and see if we can at least do one kind of debris cleanup along there, or at least get an idea of what areas need that. And then the other concern was that the trails to the beach, I'm thinking, for instance, of the one that goes from Elm Street down onto the beach, that there were complaints last year about poison ivy growing up. This would be towards, the end of the summer, mid-August. And I did put a request in, and I think it got, staff took care of it. But I'm just wondering if there's any way we could maybe try and take care of that before it develops into a problem. Thanks.
Unfortunately, poison ivy is a problem, and staff does their utmost in trying to keep on top of it. As soon as it's reported, as long as it's not on private property, and they certainly attempt to deal with it. The area in question, the 10th, we call it, but the area in question is certainly a unique area along the waterfront because the uniqueness is getting to it and having access to it, particularly with heavy machineries and eliminating some of the larger debris that is being washed on shore is an ongoing issue. There's no doubt about it, but certainly one that we're aware of that is an issue with some of the residents living down. We can certainly reassess it and see what we can do, again, being cognizant of accessibility in that area.
Any further? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. Just to echo what Councillor Grace said, I think one of the issues last year was the calls didn't come to your department, Jane. They went to a different department of the town, and they were pretty much rejected for service. And it wasn't just debris like washed up logs and things like that, which was a big part of the problem. There was a dead animal at one point. So it certainly is. I was disappointed to see that there was an X there, that there was no consideration of service for that section of the shore, because it's a different kind of shoreline, and certainly it just seemed that based on the number of comments and questions and complaints and requests last year, there should have at least been consideration, but they didn't come to your department, so you might follow up with Public Works and just see what was asked for. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of one thing is the housekeeping thing that I just wondered about. So with Maintenance Area 5, when you talk about common reed, you say it's sprayed during the annual application in the fall, but in all other areas it says something along, I'm not reading it directly, but something along the lines of controlled as permitted and necessary, or something along those lines. I just wonder why is maintenance area 5 identified differently? Is that just because, is that intentional, I guess is the question I'm asking? What does it mean?
Certainly this was a combined effort by a number of staff, and my understanding is number 5, I'll say, is the hot spot for Phragmites. The other areas, not so much, but so it was very limited in those areas, and we found we haven't had to be as aggressive as what we have had to be in Section 5.
I just wonder if it would be a good idea, because this is what we're putting out to the public, to say this is what we intend to do in all of these areas, to be very clear about what it is we will be doing when we're going to do it, right? I mean, the way we're going to control common reed is by spraying it. It's the only way to control it. And so I just think we should be real upfront with the public in this document to say that's what we're going to be doing because we have to. And you know, there's no sense in being circumspect in our language. Let's be direct about it. And the other thing, I just wanted to make a comment because it kind of really concerned me to read it, and it was in under maintenance area 4, and it was the second last bullet point. This is Port Elgin's main beach. And it talks about the difficulty staff faces in maintaining this section of beach, and I quote, "This area has become a slightly hostile environment, hostile for our staff working down there," and I think that's really unfortunate. And I just think that, you know, I think we should make the comment, you know, staff has worked very hard and diligently on putting this document together for a number of months, consulting with people, trying to come up with a compromise to look after the beach that both meets the needs of the public and meets the needs of the environment at the beach. That's a difficult line to draw. I guarantee you we have not gotten it perfect here, but we're just doing everything we can to get this right, because we want people to be able to enjoy the beach and because we want the beach to be healthy. And so I would just ask the public and hope that, you know, that it doesn't have to be a hostile environment for our staff, that, you know, we're doing our best. And if you have issues, you know, bring them to members of council or bring them to yourself, and don't make it a tough working environment for the folks who are working down there on the waterfront, because they're just trying to do their job and doing the best they can. And I just hope the public understands that, and that it can be a better working environment for those folks. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I appreciate those comments, Deputy Mayor, because it's impossible to satisfy everyone there, because there's a range of views about what should happen on that beach. And I think, Jane, you've done a very good job here of coming up with a document, a defendable document that we can say, now this is what we're going to do, after lots of input, because I do know that there has been some, in my mind, almost outrageous conduct by people down there to our staff, and it's just, to my mind, it's not acceptable. And you raise a good point. They're really trying to do what we think is best, and it shouldn't be angry at staff. They should be coming here and making their point. In any case, that's just a little huff and puff. Any other questions or comments? All in favor? Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I remember before when we were talking about it, that we were waiting on M&R documents to come forward before we came out with a plan. Is it possible we could? I'm always curious because I get questions and I want to know what we can and cannot do. When I read the part that says using enhanced grooming techniques, it's a little ambiguous. I'm not exactly sure what we can do. I always like to have a firm answer to people when they ask me the question. So.
Well, we don't necessarily have a firm answer either, and each spring we discuss with M&R what we are able to do and what we aren't able to do. We recognize the fact that it has been greatly reduced the amount of heavy equipment we can now have on the beach. And as you heard me say at budget, then we need to take a look at alternative ways to try and provide the same level of service that our patrons have been used to. And if that means hand bombing and whippersnipping, then that's what we may end up doing at our beaches now. Because M&R is what we're hearing from them, reduce the number of times you're grading the beach. We used to do it every Friday. Then we went down to 4 days or 4 times a summer. Last summer, the last 2 summers, it's been twice, and that was a challenge to get it done twice. So we will continue to have good working relationships with M&R to effectively provide an environment at the beach that our patrons are happy with. That doesn't directly answer your question, but that's kind of how.
It's just one other little input of the many that Jane tries to balance here. And I think she does a great job. So, all in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? That's carried. So, now we're at where I thought we were just a minute ago. There's 7 items there for community of the whole information. There's 5 of them for minutes and 1 from the County Bruce financial update. Questions, comments to any of them? If not, then there is 4 reports of the department. There are information reports there. I think we've had a pretty good discussion about the first one. I think the second one, which is great, maybe you want to mention the second one. Here's a good opportunity, the Craft Hockeyville 2016.
Yeah, just this weekend we were nominated for the Southampton Coliseum, so start tweeting about us, Facebooking, Instagram, and if you're not into those, then certainly online. We did a press release just this evening, so it will all be in the media, hopefully tomorrow morning, and they're here tonight, so hopefully they'll get some more stories too.
Great, I think it's great. And 2 other items there, again, some changes to the Saugeen Realtor Memorial Gardens, and there's a site plan there that will come before council. So, nothing else, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Grace and Councillor Matheson. We're adjourned for 10 minutes, so let's reconvene at 9:35.